One of the key things that you talked about in your presentation, and that an idea that came across very strongly, was the fact that you're looking at the things from a systematic perspective, the system rather than a particular part of the system or a subsystem. So you're not talking about guarding a particular site itself, but even if that site is down, what happens thereafter. So you've got a more macro picture. Can you tell us how that can work better?
Well, first of all, the reason why we take that approach is because industry is really responsible for their individual site. In my presentation, I discussed as a homeowner, I put locks on my door, and I have an alarm system. The government didn't buy those for me. I purchased them myself. I want to protect my family. I want to protect the goods in my home, my assets. But I do rely on the government to make sure the avenues and the roads, the approaches to my house are maintained, and we have law and order in the city. And that is really the role of government in this. We cannot advocate our responsibility and put it all on the shoulders of the government. We have some of that to do ourselves. And so that's what I've advocated through my presentation. And yes, government does have a role. Government has a role on those big items that industry cannot really protect against. And the individual site, of course, have the responsibility of protecting their site. But when I talk about a systems approach, is what about those things that could happen, those high impact, low frequency events, such as an electromagnetic pulse or those kind of events? What if that were to happen? What are the critical clusters of infrastructure in the United States that need to be safeguarded or hardened or protected or built more resilient, because they manage either large volumes of people or they manage or supply critical functions for the nation? And that is where the government needs to get involved, because that is not an individual site's responsibility. That's a government's responsibility.
Isn't it interesting, Bill, that Hollywood in more recent times, in the past 10 years or so, they've started making movies in which you have cataclysmic natural disasters, oceans freezing and clouds freezing, yeah, and then you also have EMPs factored into, movies where you are having, a nuclear explosion may or may not occur, but there's some EMP wave that goes out, so the helicopter shuts down, the power lines collapse, and, those kind of disasters. So we're talking about people, being more aware of these things, and yet there is this threat, something like an EMP, which people have not really encountered. I mean, people in the labs may have encountered briefly, or people who in a computer may have, briefly felt the effects. How do we know, how do we respond to something like an EMP if it has been maliciously, spread across by a well-planned organization or a well-planned adversary?
Well, first we have to be careful of Hollywood. Hollywood doesn't get all their facts right. Okay. A great example of that is we were in the process of writing some chemical regulations, and those chemical regulations were pretty strict on gasoline storage terminals out of fear that someone with a shoulder-fired missile could blow up a gasoline tank, storage tank. Reality is that's not the products of gasoline. Gasoline doesn't do that. Gasoline will not just explode like a fireball and kill thousands of people in the vicinity. There will be a fire, and there will be seepage, and there will be a lot of smoke and a lot of burning, but you don't get the explosion. Hollywood fabricates a lot of stuff, so we first have to be very careful, and for those in the audience in this area, do your research, understand the properties, and know what's real and what's Hollywood. That's important. We've never experienced an EMP attack, and yet a lot of research has been done as to what the cascading effects could be. We're not ignoring that. We see that as a viable attack vector. But on a large scale, I would submit that you would almost have to be a nation state to be able to do something like that. And if you did, it would equate itself to being an act of war. So I think you're in a very different mindset than you are traditional terrorism. And so, and every nation is going to have to take that risk management approach and look at how much is it really worth investing for something like this to occur. And it's much more than protection. It's how you would retaliate from something like that.
Well, if we now talk about the nation state, like you said, say in the 80s, up to the 80s, while the Cold War was on, the divide was fairly certain that, okay, an attack has indeed come from this particular nation state. But now we have nation states since the 80s or the late 70s who have increasingly gone into, other covert modes of operation where they're funding, if not directly having a terrorism basis on the soil. but they're arming these people, and now these people have got something like a multinational organization, you could say, the United Nations of Terror, which operates out of bases in, say, Afghanistan or those places where law and order is not sufficiently enforced. So how do you ensure that one nation state that has an intent to attack either America or one of your allies, or maybe even India or any other country that is vital to the economic fabric of the world? How do you ensure retribution, or how do you ensure that such things are thought of and planned and guarded against?
Those types of policy decisions certainly rest with each government independently. I will tell you as a citizen that I am well aware that a nation or an enemy destined to do something bad can do something bad. We have a choice to either live in fear or live in freedom. By virtue of definition, terrorism wants to make you terrorized of them. And by demonstrating that terror, you've given them a victory even before they've done anything. So if you live in a way that demonstrates a lot of fear and anxiety, you've already given them a victory and they don't have to launch anything. So I would say as an American citizen, or as just an individual who is equally as subject to a terrorist attack as you are, to live in freedom. Don't worry. I would not worry about that. I would be very vigilant. If you observe things, and we have a big campaign in the United States to be very observant and to report suspicious kind of activity, whether it's activity with your neighbors or on the street or when you're going to work and riding a metro train or whatever. And that's really the best thing for us, is to have situational awareness of what's around us. The policy issues are going to range from country to country and frankly change on a day-to-day basis or incident to incident basis.